Hit it.
Oop.
Let's get into it. 1, 2, 3.
Hey, and welcome to my whiskey den. Broken bottles, broken computers be damned. We're here with you this evening, and lucky to have Robert with us from Ironroot and all the wonderful things they've created in such a short time. And I'm just happy that everything seems to be working out at this moment. So thank you, everyone in the chat, for showing up, and thank you, Robert, for showing up.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
No, it's wonderful to have you on as I'm kind of sipping some of your stuff off to the side. It is lovely. And on that note, what is everyone sipping on tonight?
Hopefully it's all Ironroot.
I kind of feel like it's going to be that way. Robert,
I probably should pour something, huh?
Robert's drinking water.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, some of us have to be up at 2 a.m. to start the stills in the morning. Oof.
That is
Not looking forward to that.
That is, well, that's another reason why we appreciate you being on.
Yeah.
All right.
So what are you pouring, Robert?
I'm starting out with Harbinger tonight.
All right.
Go for straight to the big guy.
There
I
you
think
go.
that's fair. The big winner.
Yeah. So I just cracked open a 2019 B. So.
Ooh, there you go. Actually, yeah, that's what I got right now.
All right.
Same here.
No, I have to finish one of mine before I get there. I'm going to finish with Icarus first because that blend is just kind of screwing with my mind, and I love it. But I'll start off with a question, and it's kind of at the beginning. Was there a point where you were going to school or done with school? What was the point where you decided with you and your brother to like, hey, let's actually open a distillery? Because I find that like a really defining moment for a lot of people. And I was intrigued as to kind of, was there a specific point that like hit for you?
So for me, it was probably leading up to Christmas of my third year of law school. So halfway through my last year of law school, I was working, going to law school, and just had enough of legal work. My boss, in fact, he had moved me from doing legal work to doing stocks for him, finding stocks. So I was having a lot of fun doing that, but then realized I was not doing any legal work, and that maybe my future was not in the legal field. So at Christmas dinner, with everyone sitting down, getting ready to start, I'd kind of dropped the it was time to switch from law and do something else. And I really liked whiskey, and whiskey seemed like a good way to go. And that's when, again, she always likes to tell a story. She immediately asked me, she goes, well, I know you know how to drink it, but I'm pretty sure you don't know how to make it. And so it's like, what? Hopefully I can figure it out. So that's when my brother and I came up with the plan, and Balcones up to Chicago at Koval, and kind of all hit the whiskey trail. I mean, we kind of hit all over the place before found Hubris and really started hammering down the French stuff.
That's a good idea, though. To kind of travel a lot of places. A lot of people do that. That's kind of neat. Was there one that was more helpful to you than any of the other ones, or one you found more interesting?
I mean, I think it's between Balcones and Hubris with and basically cognac style distillation and maturation. I think I saw definitely two drastic different styles that made a lot of different sense to me in Texas. And yes, John, I do have Canadian internet. I don't know why it's having issues, but it's not having some fun.
It happens. It happens to Mike too.
Yeah, so it was for us. Specifically, Balcones and the Hubris Germain Rabon, I think, were the two biggest. But at the end of the day, I think that especially when you're starting out, the goal is to go and learn from people who know what the heck they're doing. and really kind of try to see what you fall in love with when you're out there. And for us, that's where we really took inspiration, is where you start falling in love. And what those guys do down in Waco at Balcones, I don't think any of us complain about the whiskey they're putting out right now. And, obviously Cognac's a hell of a thing too. So for us, it was kind of a combination of those two things that ultimately ended up where the whiskeys that we ended up putting out.
Yeah, and Cognac, and I've also been turned on by you and some other people that you're Josh and other people to Armagnac, which I really hadn't even heard of too much before. That is some tasty stuff. Quite tasty stuff. Yeah.
It is. It's some of my favorite. It's of all the French spirits, which is probably why I love it so much. It's really cool, guys. It's most of the houses. It's not that there's no actual distiller from the house. There's just a roaming distiller that kind of roams the French countryside, going from vineyard to vineyard, and they distill. Basically, they distill each house does like 10 to 20 barrels a year, and that's it. Armagnac really for them is their kind of insurance or safety net. So when they have a year where their wines don't make it, they sell barrels of Armagnac. If they have a kid that's getting married and they need some money to pay for a wedding, they sell barrels of Armagnac. But it's really cool talking to them because, again, they have the idea that when they make Armagnac, it's not really for them. They're making Armagnac and it's for their kids or grandkids. That's who's going to sell it. And they're just kind of a link in a chain of this distilling tradition. But, yeah, the guys in Armagnac, they really are more winemakers than they are brandy makers. Again, they may distill for 3 days a year, and that's it.
Yeah, but still, like you said, you get the kind of that lineage feel, because it seems that like everything that's pretty amazing is like 23, 24 years old. Like you said, it's like a generational thing. It's like, this is going to be for my kid's wedding or something, if they're going to keep it, it's not for now. So that's just a neat premise on that. So, and kind of keeping on that, I know you guys are like a sister city with somewhere in France because of the kind of the great wine Blight a long time ago, and they kind of did they come over to Denison, and where they kind of replanted some of the grape crops?
So what happened? So we're sister cities with Cognac, and so what happened in the kind of the turn of the century is there's this blight here in the U.S. that kills plants called phylloxera, and it got transferred over to Europe, and none of their plants had any resistance to it whatsoever. So it kind of wiped out about 80% of the French grapes, which, I mean, we can understand why that would freak them out a little bit. But what ended up being one of the ways they dealt with it, or the most prominent way they dealt with it, was by grafting their grapes on top of a Texas grapefruit. So they basically, because the Texas grapes, they are really terrible tasting and they make really bad wine. And so, but they're extremely hardy. I mean, we have some crazy environment here, so they're really, really tough and really drought resistant. So they just graft their grapes on top of it, and it uses the Texas grape roots to be able to grow the plant. And this crazy guy in Denison is the one who kind of figured out and had been doing it here for, 10 years or so when the blight really hit. And so he started helping ship over these Texas grapes over to France. So now, like every couple of years, the master cognac distillers, the mayor from Cognac, they all come over and they love hanging out at our place. So we've had the good fortune now to have a pretty good relationship with them. And even like last year in November, I spent the month in November in Cognac distilling.
Oh,
so
nice.
My poor brother got left alone, which is probably why there's a little bit less Ironroot than there should be right now. But
I'm okay with that. I got my hands on some, so I'm not going to complain. Yeah, well, that's awesome. So I always like to kind of having like a unique grab to some other place in the world where I doubt they probably get your Ironroot over there, but I'm sure it might be more clamored for if it's possible, because we all know mules happen across oceans. Like stuff happens from time to time. So it's just
they ended up with one release. Let me see.
Texas Ligation.
Grab this one. So this one, let's see if I get the. There we go.
Yep.
Okay.
I remember that guy.
So that was a release by Berry Brothers and Rudd, who did several blends of our whiskey, and then they released it all over Europe and Asia. So kind of cool. It was funny because we actually did that before we even had really spread throughout the entire state of Texas. So we always like to joke that you could get our whiskey in London and Paris before you could get it in Austin, which is kind of humorous to me.
It's neat when stuff like that happens. That's more allure to the story.
Just random way things happen sometimes, but I don't know. We've been extremely blessed. Even early on, we've just had, sometimes, things would go wrong and they led you down a path where ultimately things ended up being better than if they hadn't gone wrong. And that was one of the things that we kind of, my brother jokingly had sent me an email from Berry Brothers and Rudd because he thought it was one of those Nigerian prince emails. And so he thought I would think it was really funny, but I responded to it and he was like, "What are you doing? You can't just like start sending people stuff like that you have no idea who they are." And next thing we know, we're getting this call from this guy with a Scottish accent telling us he wants our whiskey. And what are you gonna do?
Sell it to him. I'm more than happy to sell you stuff, sir. That's awesome.
Exactly.
Like he said, like I'm international before we're national. That's fantastic. But did any of that whole like kind of cognac background? How much does that kind of factor into like your distilling style? Did that kind of play into the distilling style at all, or was that more just a neat side note to stuff?
It plays a lot into the distilling side. For one, it really dictates a lot of how we run the stills. One, we're double distillation, we double pot still. But how we cooling water for each of the different runs and how you run it during the course of those runs is really determined a lot. Then when we get to the barrel aging side, there's a whole host of things we do that are very similar to cognac on that end. Now we have bits and pieces that are tweaked on our end that we make it our own a little bit, make it a little bit more suitable for our environment. But especially on the barrel aging side, I think it's so important for us because it's managing tannins. It's why we have barrels in the warehouse that are 5 years plus old. They're still aging and still are not overpowered by the oak, that they have a lot left of aging to go. And that really comes from that French background that if we hadn't used some of those techniques, I don't think we'd be able to age things nearly as long as we do.
Well, especially down there. There's some places where it gets to be like 24 months and you're like, I don't think it could spend any more time in the barrel. Like it comes out looking almost like, black, pretty thick and darkly colored. So I find that neat. And part of the climate in Denison too? Because like I know you guys are a little bit different than the rest of it. Where doesn't some of your your barrels kind of come? They don't evaporate as much as in other parts of the state. Am I right? Stupid internet.
Yeah, Denison's going to be, since we're so much farther north than, let's say, Balcones, Garrison, a lot of those guys that are a lot farther south, we don't have quite as hot of summers as they do. We're slightly cooler. Now, that's 2 or 3 degrees in the course of a day most of the time, sometimes more warmer, but I'd say we are a little bit cooler, a little bit shorter summers. But we still have, 9-10 months of summer compared to what they do in Kentucky. So we still have a ton of heat and weather we have to deal with. Ironically, where we deal with things more than what they do is we actually have more dynamic shifts in pressure, which is because we're up closer to Oklahoma. We get the tail end of a lot of those big tornadic storms that roll right through. Poor Oklahoma gets hammered every year. But we get tons of shifts in pressure, and that really moves things around in barrels when that starts happening. I can tell when storms are about to start coming through because you can actually see the barrels start weeping. Certain ones will have like little pinhole leaks, and they'll start like crying. If you've ever seen a thing like the news stories where the Virgin Mary's crying tears or whatnot when miraculous things are happening, that's kind of what it's like in the barrel room. You can see the barrels start crying. You know what's coming.
It's kind of a religious experience for some of us. I would agree with that.
Yeah, there's spirits in the air one way or another, I guess.
Yeah. So you guys have borrowed from kind of the European method, this process called élevage. Could you explain that a little bit for some of those out there that do not understand or do not know exactly what that is?
Yeah, sure. So the term élevage literally means to raise. And so it's the process of tasting through your barrel room periodically and treating basically the barrels like kids. If they need encouragement in one way or another, you can get in there and do whatever to them to get them to go to the direction you want to. So practical matter, what that means is during the course of the year, we're going to taste through the barrels at least 4 times. We're going to be checking, are they pulling tannin too quickly for their age? Are they not pulling enough tannin? Are they developing properly? Are they weird, or are they right on task? Or, and then we'll also looking at the flavor profile of certain barrels. Are they really spicy? Are they really sweet? Are they big caramel bombs? Are they fruity? What's really going on within each barrel? Because they're all different. And by us knowing individual barrels, it makes it much easier to build blends, because when you're going through the barrel warehouse, we're picking ones that fit certain flavor profiles, but also we know when we're building a blend and we're tasting it, we're like, man, that just needs more sweetness. We can go and add a barrel to the blend that has that sweetness, or we can be like, man, this just the tannin on this is just coming through too strong. We can go through and take a barrel or 2 of the heavier tannin out that we usually use for structure. So you're always playing with it, and really helps you nail in what blend you're doing. As far as the management side, though, a lot of times we're really looking at tannin, because if barrels are going in different flavor directions, that's what we want. I want a ton of different flavors, but I also don't want them they can become too tannic or not tannic enough. And so when they're too tannic, for bourbon, I'll actually lower the proof in cask. And by lowering the proof, not only are we going to soften some of those tannins, but we're also going to encourage that barrel to start pulling out wood sugars rather than the tannins and the phenols and stuff that you're going to pull at a little bit higher proof. So it'll encourage it to pull in some of those sweeter notes that kind of help round it out a little bit more. We can also take it from the outside and move it towards the inside of the warehouse if it's just really drastic. So it's really about raising the kids, because I always get told that you rebirth a whiskey in the still, and then you've got years that you have to raise it before you let it loose on the world. And so for us, we've been letting a lot of little kids out there doing some cool stuff with them, but they're always getting older, always getting better. But I think it's really learning to manage a warehouse, and the only way to really do that is to get in there and taste every barrel. I think my favorite distillery I went to in Armagnac, I was talking to one of their one of the sons that worked there, and I asked him how often he tasted his barrels for the élevage, and he just looked at me and he goes, "Every barrel, every day." I said, I want to work here.
Wow. So do I understand right? You guys are using some larger barrels than the standard 53-gallon size?
Right. Over the last basically 3 years, we started moving from 53s to 63s. So the first year it was about 30% went to 63s. Last year we were closer to 80%, and this year we'll be 100% in 63-gallon barrels. It's one of the nice things that when you start winning awards, the cooperages are willing to do crazy things for you, and so we get them to really do some really custom style larger casks for us they wouldn't typically do for distilleries. So we get into their kind of wine cooperages and start playing around with them, making them char things and do things they wouldn't normally do. Yeah. So it's a lot of fun.
You feel like you've kind of found a sweet spot with that, or is there still some more tinkering or exploration, left to do for you guys?
There's always tinkering. That's fun. I think if you're not tinkering, that means you're not trying to get better. And I think it should be the goal of every distiller. It doesn't matter how good your last whiskey is. Your goal is always to make that next one a little bit better. So for me, again, 63 is kind of this new thing that we're really now starting to come to maturity at the moment. Maybe 73 gallons. Maybe that's going to be the sweet spot for Texas for where we're at. Not sure yet. We'll have to see, but we're always playing around. with barrel size, different chars. We really personally prefer a much lower char, where you see a lot of guys do char 3, char 4. For us, we do almost all char 1. Again, coming from that brandy background, I love toasted casks and I love lightly charred barrels.
I was gonna say I didn't taste like a super heavy, like I don't know, like super oak note to do it to too much, where it was like kind of like you said, like that burnt more finish. It was all like kind of a lighter, kind of friendlier oak to it. Yeah. So speaking of which, I'm gonna try another one. I'll try. I'll catch up on the Harbinger with everyone now.
So don't worry, we've got some ones that are pretty intense on the oak. We have one style of barrel that I really enjoy called a wave stave, where there's grooves on the inside of the barrel. So when they char it, it chars heavier the tops of the grooves and lighter on the base parts. So you get to kind of do 2 different chars within the same barrel. It's also the only barrels we've ever gotten that we actually can get a distinct kind of wood smoke out of, which I really love, and I think really adds some really cool flavors to the blends. But then you can get some really, really wild single barrels from them. I think this last year we did 3 or 4 of those as single barrels, and they just turned out crazy awesome.
That's fantastic. I've heard about that with the grooves. So I was intrigued. Just does make me feel like I need to take a couple more trips down there frequently throughout the year, but it could happen.
Yeah. I'm curious, going to the larger barrels, are you seeing any reduction in angel share at all? I know just from my personal tinkering around with mini barrels, going from like a 1 liter to a 2 liter to a 5 liter barrel, the smaller the barrel, the more I lose to angel share. The slightly larger the barrel, the more I can, regulate that a little bit better. But curious how that applies to even bigger barrels.
Very, very astute. That is actually 100% true. So for us, depending on where is in the warehouse, we saw with 53-gallon barrels, we were between 9% and 11% angel share. By moving up to the 63s, we've been able to reduce that closer between a 7 to 9, depending on where it is in the warehouse. So we've reduced it just by a little bit. But even just that 2%, it's going to reduce a little bit the wood interaction we're getting. So we're able to leave the whiskey in the barrel longer. So the hope is that ultimately the 63s will allow us to get more into that 5, 6, 7, maybe 8-year time period for barrels. Not to say that we haven't been able to get some of the 53s to 5+ years, which again, obviously we have a few of those left. But overall, financially, it makes a little bit more sense for us as a distillery that we not losing quite as much. If our ultimate goal is to get that older whiskey, it pays off to rather than have I'd rather not have 10 bottles left in a barrel. I'd rather have 100 bottles left in a barrel.
Yeah.
And so for us, that's obviously a little bit of an idea, but because it is that bigger barrel, you're not really as worried about the tannin pulling as quickly as it would in a 53, which for me is that balancing out that Texas environment a little bit. And be honest, in our taste test between 53s and 63s that we laid down right next to each other, same rack, just testing out the real differences between the two, I'd say the 63 is probably lag in maturation behind the 53s by about 2 or 3 months, and that's about it.
That's not bad. I mean, really, in the grand scheme of things.
No, yeah. So it overall, it's going to allow us to put an extra couple of years on the whiskey, ultimately, and still be able to get more mature whiskey out there. Because obviously, as I said, the goal is to make better whiskey, and I'm a believer that time does great things. It's not everything. Obviously, we've put out some younger whiskeys here that we've done some really cool stuff with. But to me, the more we're able to play with that and been able to push it, I mean, you were tasting Icor earlier, and I mean, the difference between that and Harbinger, you're talking that's a 1 more year in cask, and that's the difference between the two things.
And it's pretty significant.
It's amazing what the difference is. And again, that 1 more year of maturation we're able to get out of it.
So I got a question for you. You can't mention one of your current whiskeys, but what's your ideal whiskey, or the whiskey you want to make from the nose to the mouthfeel to the finish?
Ooh.
And how close do you think you are to getting there?
I think we still got a ways to go on. For me, on the bourbon side, my ideal bourbons. Again, part of it's also dependent on mood, what mood I'm in. But I'm always going to be playing around with E.H. Taylor barrel proof, Elijah Craig barrel proof, especially some of the older the hazmat releases, the 142 proof Elijah Craig barrel proof is one of my favorite whiskeys of all time. There's also some stags that are up there. Obviously, they're pretty fantastic when it comes to bourbons. And so, me, those deep, dark, rich bourbons are really what we're looking for and what I'm doing. And that, to me, again, is where you start seeing, as you move into that third and fourth year with whiskeys in Texas, the bottom kind of just drops. That depth really starts coming in. You have some really cool flavors before that. But really, when you start passing about that 30-month point is when whiskey really starts getting that deep, and you get that. To me, the one of the flavors that I absolutely love, it's like it's almost like an old antique polish that you get. That you can just smell that, and it just, to me, screams maturity when I smell that on a whiskey. You get that with that nice fruit balance, and that's me all the way. So I think on the bourbon side, that's kind of the things that I idealize. On the single malt side of life, oh gosh, that's tough. Because again, that's entirely dependent on my mood. Sometimes I just want one of those giant cherry bombs. So I think, I think some of the best single malts I've had recently had some Bunnahabhain, a 28-year-old Bunnahabhain that was an independent bottling that was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, Alexander Murray probably.
Yeah.
Yep. And
that is delicious as hell.
It does not suck. But even just like on a regular side for like a regular release, I think even if I get like a Bunnahabhain 12 or something like that, I think that would be a phenomenal place to get with our single malts, which are coming. They're taking time, but we're slowly getting there on that. And then ultimately, breaking stuff. Ultimately, I would love. I think something that will be happening this year at some point we'll finally going to be jumping on the peat train a little bit, making a peated single malt, but we'll get there. Signatory Josh Holiday is a signatory independent bottling, wasn't a Alexander Murray.
Sorry, I knew there was someone else had an Alexander Murray that was like it too. But Arthur had a little question. I'm going to bring that up here. He said, I'd like to see a bourbon named Dallas with a mash bill of BBC, purple, and flint as flavoring grains, aged exclusively in heavily charred French and Hungarian oak wave staves. So, does that sound like it might turn out like something exciting? I was pretty definitive, Arthur, about what you were looking for.
That's exactly what he wants. So the only issues with that right now is I finally got the barrel makers to start doing. They're going to be making us some 63-gallon wave stave casks, which has been a big thing for us, but I've not been able to tuck them into doing that for any European or French oak yet. But maybe I need to get on them on that one. As far as the French oak, definitely there's definitely some purple corn in French oak and flint corn in French oak, and Hungarian. I mean, we always do purple and Hungarian, so we're not too far off from being able to put something like that together. Wave stave component of that's the only one that.
It seems like Arthur had a little dream about it, like dream about like the setup of what he wanted here. But
distillery. But talking about different casks and whatnot, what other finishing options have you guys been playing with, or what intrigues you going forward as far as what you'd like to maybe see some of the Ironroot stuff finished in?
So you're going to see some crazy stuff this year. That is pretty much the theme of the end of the year for us is cask finishing. So we started a project last year. The holidays came up, and we came up with a crazy plan that we wanted to take, because our single barrel program thus far, we've done a lot of where we would do evolution casks, where we're actually you come and you pull a quarter of the cask out every 6 months or so you can really see how it ages. The other part, we were like, well, what would also be fun is we took that same cask, we divided it up and finished it in different casks, and then you were able to get bottles of each of those finishes so you could see exactly what the exact same whiskey would do in different casks.
You were doing some exciting stuff, because I was happy with getting the 3 bottles of the Evolution barrel from Josh and Gretchen probably later this year. Now there's a whole nother Evolution side I need to grab a hold of.
There is. So
damn.
The first 3 that's coming out on that side are we have a Pinot de Charente, which most of you probably not ever heard of that. We've got Armagnac casks, and then we also have Madeira and Sauterne. Sauternes is be the 4th one that we'll do. So all those are coming this year from us. We have stuff in sherry cask as well, but that's single malt, and that's going to be years before you see that coming. But Pinot de Charente it's kind of like a fortified wine. The guys in Cognac aren't super great at making table wine. Their grapes are not great for that. So what they do instead, for something they either drink before or after a meal, is create this thing called Pinot de Charente. And so they take 3-year-old Cognac, they back blend it with either fresh pressed grape juice or just lightly fermented grape juice, fortified up to 20% alcohol like you would with a fortified wine. Then they barrel age that for 10 to 20 years. So it creates this like beautiful honeyed, technically a spirit, but essentially a wine. And it's absolutely gorgeous. And so it turns whatever whiskey we put into it to like a candy. It's pretty amazing.
Wow.
So if you could, would you try to make a cognac?
Oh, I've got great brandy. No, don't you worry about that. So we've been making brandy for 5 years now. We've only ever released a small amount. That was one kind of random thing that we did. We made an orange muscat brandy once and aged it for about a year. But yeah, all of our brandy right now, we took all the 4 and 5 year olds and we did a blend of that, and then we put it in what's called it's a giant barrel. And so it's a barrel that would hold 15 normal barrels. And that was used in Cognac. It's called a footer. And it's, well, excuse my French. My French is terrible, but foudre or whatever it is. So it basically is a 15 barrel that was used in Cognac for about 10 years. So they used all the wood out of it. They've gotten most of the extraction out of it. And so we put a lot of brandy in that. So they'll leave in there for another, could be 5 years before we pull it out. So that is my goal to have as my very first double-digit age statement product.
Wow.
That sounds lovely.
That's awesome.
Steven had a little question on the whole finishing side of things. Have you guys ever thought about doing a Solera cask finish to anything?
Solera barrels. So barrels that are used in Soleras, they don't typically give those up because of the way a Solera is built. That it's they're just pulling spirit out of the bottom cask and filling down. So it's not very common that any barrels used in Soleros will come out. It's part of the reason why there's such issue with sherry barrels, because the sherry Soleras, they don't like giving those barrels up because they need them. They've got them aged to how they want them. And so it's very limited. Usually the Scotch guys are going to be the ones buying all those up. Now, some of the barrels used for some of the Solera aged rums you'll see come up from time to time, but those are a little bit rarer, more difficult to get your hands on.
It's fair. We have one place in Wisconsin that finishes their rye in a Solera finish, or going through it like that. So that's why I kind of saw his and kind of thought of that myself. Yeah. But it is, considering you're with as in depth as you're getting in the first place with barrels and where they go and tasting them and everything, that's just adding a whole bunch more work if you were doing something like that. So, well,
I mean, I think Solera, especially in warmer climates, is a really intelligent way to go about creating spirits. Bourbon presents a problem because you can't really Solera bourbon, because as soon as you take bourbon and you put it into another barrel, and if it's not a brand new barrel, it's now no longer bourbon. So that creates an issue on that end. So as we get into some of these other spirits, again, what we can do ultimately with corn whiskeys and stuff like that, we've kind of created a bastardized Solera for a product that we call esoteric. That the next bottling shouldn't be too long off. I'll have to yell at Jonathan for that. Someone's selecting. But we do have kind of a bastardized Solera for that. But I really think, like in Texas, I really see a future for used casks, creating some really amazing spirits with used casks. I think that ultimately that is a path that we will, 50% of what we do ultimately will go down. So as we get some of those casks that we're able to age out and start rolling them through that a little bit more appropriately. So right now, the brandy is the I guess that's the closest thing I have to any Solera aging right now, besides this one random whiskey project. But ultimately, I'd like to see a lot of that being done.
And I think it would, like you said, with the heat, you could see a lot of progression happen pretty quick down there. So that's neat. I dig that. But I know you guys play a lot with heirloom corns, like more so than a lot of other people. I mean, we've kind of reviewed a couple other ones that did some unique ones, but you guys really kind of play in that wheelhouse compared to other people. They'll, sometimes different wheats and stuff, but it seems like you guys are playing a lot with different corns, and the Estaca green corn you guys, I think, did something with recently. How did you guys kind of come, I don't know, it could be wrong, but how did you kind of come to corn as being kind of the grain you wanted to kind of delve into more so and play around with?
Well, one, that's what grows around us. So that was an easy way to get into it. But for us, the reason why we play with corn, it was one of those realizations on the brandy side. You start really looking at what all these different grapes can bring to a brandy. And the thought was, well, if that is doing that much on the brandy side, is it possible that also exists on the grain side? We just haven't really talked about it. And that's really when the conversation really started happening. You started seeing balcones again. Obviously, the blue corn, they do giant inspiration on that end for us to even really jump down that rabbit hole. We've seen some other of our really good friends, the guys up at J. Henry, have a beautiful red corn that they're using up there. There's some guys out in South Carolina doing some cool stuff with Jimmy Red. So you're really starting to seeing different areas, these corns really pop up. And so it was one of those things I think a lot of us kind of had an idea at that time, was like that was something we should play with. Jonathan and I came to the conclusion, well, why would we just want to do one? Why not do a bunch? You open up a seed book on corn and there's 1,000 different species of corn. There's only one way to figure out what these things taste like is whiskey, and that's to make it yourself. And so that's what we started doing. And we found initially a core group that we really fell in love with. And then every year, Jonathan still makes 3 or 4 experiments, 8 sometimes. I think it's really crazy. And I'm not at the distillery enough. They're like, guess what I made? I'm like, oh, God, we don't have any Bloody Butcher. We need more Bloody Butcher. I don't know what you're doing. But Jonathan is always on the playing side, which I think is a lot of fun. And again, it's so much fun to go back in the warehouse and really, especially when people come down, you're like, hey, like one of our favorites that we've done recently that isn't part of the core line, the Oaxaca green corn that we just did with a single barrel release. That was something when people came to the store, they were like, you've tasted the Bloody Butcher, you've tasted this, now taste this one. This one's completely different than those others. So that one's always been really fun. I think the next one coming up, it's about to become to a cool age. Again, basically when everything hits 2, that's when they're really fun. It's like that baby is now smiling back at you and interacting with you rather than just laying there and looking cool. That is probably the glass gemmed flint corn. It's the next really cool.
Oh, that sounds cool. Are you breaking more stuff over there, Mike?
I just, I got a pattern going here. Is there an heirloom that you're not as crazy about it in the whiskey, but when it's with other corns, you like it?
For me, probably the Floriani flint corn by itself. It's actually got the most spice of any corn that we've done. Off the still, it's almost got like this mushroomy, umami, and then spice. And so by itself, it's not that it's a bad whiskey by itself by any means, but it's one of those that adds some really cool spice elements or some really interesting earth elements that we don't get in any other distillate that we make. That really adds a lot of complexity to the baseline of our whiskeys, especially like Promethean. It really plays. It becomes almost when you start mixing it with other whiskeys, you get some of those dark chocolates that really start coming into the back end of that whiskey.
Okay.
So you just mentioned you had released a single barrel of that Awaken corn Harbinger for a charity. Do you guys still have that available, and can people still order that?
We do not. That unfortunately was a 24-hour. The guys out of Arizona kind of went nuts on that and bought it all. It literally lasted about 24 hours on sale. We do have a couple more barrels of it, so you will see it come back. We'll probably have a sister cask of that come up at some point later this year. So if you're looking for it, keep your eyes out. It will be coming, I promise you, at some point. It's just deciding when we want to actually unleash the brother of that one.
Glad I nailed a bottle.
Same here. Yeah.
That's awesome.
No.
Do you? I know you can't predict the distribution future, but do you know or have any kind of idea about how long before you'll be able to go even further outside of Texas, aside from Total Wine?
I do have a couple people who have asked when you're getting into Kansas City. Apparently, there's like 4 or 5 people that have all asked. He's one of them that have asked me to ask that, so I just thought I would bring it up as you're getting into that question.
But I'll drive down there, as you well know.
So right now, our outside of Texas agreements, a semi-exclusive one. It's not exactly exclusive. They're still for you guys in Kansas City. You can order a product from Ace Spirits. I think they're up in like Minnesota. They do shipping, which sucks because they have a shipping cost on it. But they're that's the only way at the moment to get it into Kansas City for me. Unfortunately, because there's a place called Total Wine in Kansas City, it's made it impossible for the moment for Total Wine to actually get a store there. So that limited me on that. For us, as far as expanding outside of really that kind of the more outside the Total Wine reach, I mean, there are a number of independents all over the country that we work with as well, as I can get product there. And that's always the struggle, that as we grow and as we're able to sales grow and whatnot, I'll actually be able to hire salespeople. And then that's when I'll actually be able to get into a place. Because the problem is if I just put distribution in a place and I can't support it, like I can't go up there and visit it every month or so to go shake hands, talk to people, do tastings. Then the stores don't want to bring it on really because it will sit on their shelves and they're not happy with me at that point. So that's why for a lot of the smaller distilleries, we tend to be very regional and localized, and that's more or less because it's the how far can I drive in a day, do a tasting, and get back home. Is really. You see a lot of
that's almost like sales quality control, like how well can we represent ourselves someplace else and feel comfortable with it too,
Exactly. And the last thing I want to do is get a store on board, get them to bring in a product and then not support them. And then the bottles sit on their shelf. So they've wasted money. So if we were to continue growing, then I would show back up at a, place outside of Texas. I'm going there and I'm like, oh, well, this bottle was put here 4 years ago. Oh boy. It's not usually good to start the relationship on that end.
I can tell you it moves pretty quickly here in South Carolina. Every single time I'm in Total Wine, there's somebody looking for a bourbon recommendation that I just happened over here. And that's the first thing I'm going to is, have you tried Ironroot?
Well, I appreciate that.
Because it's, as I've said before, it hands down, it's my favorite bourbon right now. I mean, it is. I love the uniqueness of it. I love the flavors. And, we were reviewing Icarus earlier on. And one of the things I think that just you guys do to such an excellent level is your blending, because the integration of all the notes is just amazing. Nothing is fighting with each other. everything's in there just like this beautiful layered cake that you just work through, and there's such nuance, and it's just amazing. And across the board, every whiskey I've had from you guys is like that, from Icarus to Promethean to Harbinger to Icar. It's all, everything is nuanced and just gorgeous, and y'all do an incredible job with the blending. So
Thank you very much. And again, I think a lot of that, again, goes back to that kind of that French training. That is a lot of what their focus is. Because with them, they're actually taking every year the entire vintage, like in Armagnac, and they will take the entire vintage. They'll do a blend of it together, mix it up, and put it back in cask. And so they're constantly working on their blends, whether they're going to do something, keep it as a vintage, or whether they're moving and pulling stuff from older or newer vintages. And they're constantly every year putting blends together. They have this technique that what they call Coupe de Mer. So they create what's called a mother blend. And then they will start with that about 4 or 5 years out from when they think they're going to release it. And over those 4 or 5 years, the goal is you put that blend together and then you're slightly tinkering with it every few months. And it's until you finally get it down to that perfect thing. And that's part of that, again, that élevage process that you're slowly tinkering with things. They're going to be doing a slow reduction on it. So they're slowly reducing it to bottle strength during the course of that time. So again, because at the very end, if you add a ton of water to a spirit right at the very end, it kind of fractures it. It's going to break it. It's going to create a little bit more angularness to the whiskey. So the earlier you can start putting that blend together, putting that whiskey together, and slowly reducing that whiskey down to bottling strength, the better off your whiskey is going to be. The closer you can pull it out of cask at bottling strength, the better off it's going to be. That's why, like right now, I'm actually starting the watering down process for what the Harbinger release for. That'll be the very end of this year. And by the way, we just also tasted today the 20D release that's coming up, and it's by far the best release of Harbinger we've ever done.
Oh man,
Tease. They're just teasing everybody. That's good though.
yeah.
Not cool, Robert. Not cool.
Yeah, so that's that kind of the, again, it's on the blending side, it's really sitting down and doing it over a period of time rather than trying to sit down and create that blend right there and then that one day. Because again, every day you come to something, your palate's going to be a little bit different based on the stress that you've had that day or the day before, how much coffee you've drank that day, what you had to eat. All those things are coming in and playing around with your palate. And so by doing it over a long stretch of time, you really can massage that whiskey into where you really want it to be at the end of the day.
And when you mentioned that fracturing part, like you can tell that. I feel like you can really tell that in some places where it gets watered down right at the end. Between like you can tell someone's like cask strength versus like they're say 47, 48% rather than like the 58% version. All of a sudden there's a dramatically change of difference in taste and flavors, and that would happen anyways. But like you said, there's almost like a fracture in like the wood or barrel note taste that I get from those. So I understand that completely.
Oh yeah.
And Oscar had a question for you. How many experiments do you have going on that is for your personal experience only?
Ooh, that's tough. Because the Gallaudets are always trying to twist my arm to letting them taste everything. So it's difficult for things that are just personal.
Well, I think you can expand that because if I was down there, I'd be twisting arms too. I mean, it'd be hard not to with you guys.
Things that are kind of just like really personal experiences. A lot on the brandy side, I would say we do a lot of really interesting brandy experiments, playing around with wood, impact to spirit. Because we get the grapes in a lot smaller amounts, most of those end up being personal exploration, personal experiences, and we take those and we actually, a lot of what we learn on the brandy side, playing around with different fill levels, different strengths, different entry proofs, we end up applying to the whiskey side of things. Most of the whiskey experiments, by the time we get to the actual production to actually make a whiskey out of it, we've already done the things that we need to make it into 4 or 5 barrels. And at that point, if I'm making 4 or 5 barrels of it, unless it's just something that ends up kind of blasé that we'll end up using in a blend here and there, it will end up going to the more single barrel stuff, because that's the stuff we want to share with people. And we want to make sure that you get that experience. Like there's one whiskey that I will tell you guys about that will be coming at some point. I don't know. It's actually one of the oldest things in the warehouse. We've actually made a whiskey with mesquite beans. So not mesquite wood. It's not mesquite wood smoke. This is actually the seeds from mesquite we've taken, ground it up into a flour, and used as part of a whiskey mash. And it's one of the cooler things in the warehouse. And
that sounds incredible. Sorry, just
Awesome.
getting a completely different flavor profile from that.
It's something that's a completely out there crazy thing that, again, at some point that will come, but I don't know.
That's awesome. Well, and on a different note, you do, and there's a couple other distilleries we know of that are like family-run distilleries, and it seems like you guys run it very smoothly. It does seem like that, but I was going to say I've seen some other family-run companies where it is almost disturbing when you get beyond like that first level. But how is it working with your family and your brother and your mother all being in the same area? Because you guys, it seems very harmonious, and obviously everyone has a little issues and stuff, but I mean, it seems like you guys get along pretty well for doing that, because there's a lot of things that come up in a business that can cause issues.
Yeah, I think a very important thing early on for us was learning that Marcia is always right. And as long as we all get that through our heads, then we're all in good shape. I think the Henrys know that too. You listen to Mama,
Yep.
As long as Mama's happy, everybody's happy.
That's very true with them too.
I think for us, one of the things, like, again, early on, I would say there was more kind of struggle, because we each were trying to find what is our place, what is kind of our lane, if you were, that we all have strengths, but at the same time we were all wanting to do every part of everything, and at some point you have to realize that doesn't work. And so people start gravitating towards certain things, especially with their strengths lie. So Jonathan, very much, obviously he's the head distiller for a reason. He's very much heavy on the technical side. And you want to start talking about different ester formations during fermentation. When are those going to appear? What temperatures are they going to appear? What parts of the runs are those actually going to come out on? When they go into esterification, transesterification, what those are going to turn into, that stuff, because Jonathan's very much that science-minded person at the distillery. And so him really taking lead on that and really starting to set production schedules. Now, sometimes I have to twist his arm, and like any good little brother does. But we each kind of found out, for me, it was working a lot more in the barrel warehouse, scrambling up among the barrels, finding out, there's some certain things that when you spend more time in your warehouse, you start noticing things. Like when we start pulling barrel samples from certain barrels, they start developing in certain ways, taking tasting notes, knowing a lot of those sorts of things. I was really sensitive to picking up a lot of those end of things, and really helps out on the blending end, especially when we're finishing up blends, or really trying to get that last little bit in where it needs to go. And then Marcia, we found that Marcia really, she is the heart and soul of what we do, and that she's somebody that, I think when you show up at the distillery, she's the one that makes you feel like family. And I think that's something that's really important to getting us all when we're working 20 hours in a day, that mom's right there with you and it's making you feel okay about everything. So I think she's been the one that not only makes sure all the things that fall through the cracks are taken care of, but that makes sure that everybody's in pretty good spirits at the end of the day.
Yeah, and especially when someone shows up, kind of like you said, getting that whole image. I don't want to say image of family, but that whole the inclusiveness feel when you show up. It's not just you're showing up at a distillery and your people are doing their thing, but they're really inviting you in into the experience. That's what really makes, even if you weren't doing world-class whiskey, which you are, that can really like enhance the whole experience. And you're like, you take something that's just okay or medium, and you're like, I really enjoy going there. You know, like it boosts the elevation of what you're experiencing, just the whole experience. So I was going to say, for you guys, it's just taking it a whole notch higher than what you're doing with all your World Whiskey Awards. So I was going to say, it's just pulling people in even that much closer to what's going on. So that's awesome.
Yeah, I think that's, to me, at the end of the day with whiskey, it's about those sorts of things, that it's about those, when you're hanging out with your friends, relaxing those nights, tasting through whiskeys, or there's just something special about those days that when you're with family and friends and enjoying whiskey and the relaxed feeling that you can get around that. Again, it helps create those memories that really make life worth living, worth enjoying. It's one of those things that allows you to slow down sometimes in the kind of crazy parts of life and really take appreciation for the moment that you're in. And I think that, to me, is what I love about it more than anything.
That's when you mentioned Jay Henry. Just from being in Wisconsin, I do notice a lot of similarities between your families.
Oh, yeah.
I was going to say you got to, like you said, mom's kind of in charge and you want to make mom happy.
Yeah.
But both of your moms are also very fun, you know, like
yeah.
it's not like super strict, like hand slapping or anything like that. It's very inclusive. So I do notice a lot of kind of family similarities. So that was really neat. Now it's getting close to the end because we don't want to keep you too long, but we have to discuss this sensible sedan issue. and how did you become into these sensible sedans, and what the hell qualifies as a sensible sedan?
That's a question more from my fiance. She's the one who created the website and snuck that into the bio on the website. And she always gives me a hard time that I've, for the last 8 years, I've always picked sedans to drive rather than something sportier or more fun. And so she always gives me a hard time. She likes busting my balls on that one. They get great gas mileage. They fit all the whiskey-related nonsense. You got to have a big enough trunk to fit like 4 or 5 cases of whiskey in, plus all the pop-ups and glassware and all this stuff. So you got to have a sensible sedan or a small SUV if you're going to be in the whiskey business.
Sorry, I didn't mean to bust your balls on it, but it was just such an interesting thing. I was like, well, maybe he really is into sedans, and he has like a specific thing about it. But
I only drive very specific sedans too. It's
You sound like a good family man in the making right there.
Yeah, it really does.
You're not afraid
to place the car seat around the case of 6 bottles of whiskey.
You gotta have enough room to strap them both down.
Yeah. That's right. See?
I'm curious about one thing. Something that jumped out to me is your involvement in the whiskey community, like in social media and whatnot. Mm-hmm. Very responsive, very open. And I don't typically see that, honestly, with other distilleries. Is that just an extension of who you guys are, or is that an active marketing decision, or a little bit of both, or what?
For me, it's because like I love whiskey, and to me, I've always had fun watching the whiskey YouTubers, and so it came kind of more as a natural extension because like I've always enjoyed watching it and done it, and I mean over the years like became friends with Chris Trevino, the Liquor Hound, was one of the first ones that I really got to know and do, and that was, and again he does most of the time. A lot of it people ask me for samples and stuff, and I was giving them samples of stuff that wasn't Ironroot, and then finally they started asking, well, dude, send me some of your stuff, and I want to see what you're doing. But to me, I love the community, the YouTube community. Again, it's crazy. I mean, looking in the chats, I mean, I can recognize 60% of the people in the chats generally, and chat and BS with them because again, that's what I love. I love doing it. I sit there and listen to people talk about whiskey and hang out. And again, except when I have to be up at 2 a.m. or start the stills up. But I normally I do it to relax because I really just enjoy talking whiskey, and it's a great place to be in the chats and talk with people about whiskey. And again, a lot of times I try to, unless people ask me questions directly, when I try to shade away from talking about Ironroot all the time because I feel like a corporate shill sometimes on it. But to me, it's not something that I feel like it's my community a little bit. And I think that there's definitely a lot of distillers that I know. Again, one, they've got families and lives and don't have time to deal with it. But also they have different groups that have become their kind of whiskey communities, whether it's clubs or just another group of distillers, or I think everybody, again, finds their tribe of people they love hanging out with and talk about. So,
well, I know we appreciate it because
why I engage is because a lot of times when people reach out, I'm like, I've either chatted with them in chats or, I've been watching them for a long time.
Well, like I was saying, I know we appreciate it because it's always, like you said, sometimes when you're kind of almost first getting started into whiskey, like you're a little more hesitant than to be, even with like liquor store people ask them to get a bottle for you. You're a little sheepish of things when you can be a little bit more open and kind of forthcoming and just ask questions. And I think you make people feel very relaxed in the situation when you're talking with someone who's accomplished as much as you have in the time you have. So I was going to say it's a testament to you. So
well, and I don't think anybody, you guys should be scared to ask. I mean, distillers are people too. I don't think there's any superhero-ness or pedestal for us to be up on. And to me, I love talking about the nitty-gritty stuff of whiskey. And so when people come up and ask me that, that's when I get excited. So that's what I enjoy doing. And so that's why I naturally go towards whiskey groups on YouTube, because I get to sit here and talk about, again, things like esters and maturation styles and all the nerdy things that I love getting into. Because again, my poor fiance, she just looks at me and she's like, I don't want to talk about that. I do not care about that. So we got to get that out somehow.
That's kind of, Mike, that was like your one friend's wife who was watching the show. You can explain that for a second.
Yeah, well, I guess we're far enough in that the Tourette's alarm can go off. But she was watching us just talk about whiskey, just sitting around there, and he was watching it, and she goes, "What the fuck is this? They're just talking about whiskey? Who the fuck watches this?" He goes, "Well, I do, and people like this stuff." She's like, "This is boring. Who does this?" And he's like, "Lots of people do." And then when I went up to their house and saw her, she was like, "Seriously, people do this?" Like, yeah, people do it all the time. That's the best part. You're just talking about whiskey and having a conversation.
Yeah, and it's about having a nice conversation with people, kind of in general. Which I think we were talking about the Whiskey Congress and another channel where people just don't sit down and talk in general with people anymore. There's just not a nice conversation. It seems like that's something that's kind of fading away, and this type of community is one where you can kind of nerd out a little bit, but in a really nice, relaxed setting. And I don't know. We're just hoping that doesn't fade away, and we enjoy this type of community. So
yeah.
But we are over the hour mark, and we don't want to hold Robert on too long since he has to get up pretty early tomorrow.
To do the Lord's work. Yeah,
do the Lord's work. Yeah. We all want you to continue doing it.
And the power of the ginger compels you.
I throw some whiskey at the screen, but I haven't bad luck tonight. So
all of a sudden, Mike needs a new computer as of later tonight.
This happened earlier.
But thank you, Robert, for coming on. We really appreciate it. Everyone in the chat, we appreciate you being here all this evening, kind of listening, talking with us, coming up with a couple questions. And later on this week, we're going to be dropping the reviews of some of the Ironroot product. And then next Sunday, we're having Josh and Gretchen on. We're going to talk to them about kind of being brand ambassadors or sales reps for a company, because it is a very unique kind of position. And I think a lot of people would want it, but it's always good to know a little bit more about it.
Yeah.
Plus, I really believe that they're an excellent ambassador for Texas. Before you guys started with them, I was really wondering who they would be working for at one point, because they really pushed out a lot of excellent knowledge about Texas whiskey and did it in a really nice, kind of refined, approachable way.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk with them next week, and then I think the 23rd we're going to have Dominic DeSanto on, talk about DeMello's. It's a honey liqueur, or not liqueur. It's a honey spirit. And I take that back, honey spirit. And they age, the one we really like is the Royal Reserve, where they age it for 6 months, and the new version is 10 months in an old bourbon cask. And after that, I think it is Blake from Sealbox is coming on.
Yeah.
We're going to have him on the 30th to talk about what he does, kind of finding smaller craft distilleries and kind of helping them get larger distribution than what a lot of people typically get, or restricted by state sometimes. Whoa.
Yeah, I think he represents one of my favorite small distiller. They're probably bigger than we are, to be honest with you, but distillery called French Lick out of Indiana. If you guys haven't heard of them, that's one that needs to be on your radar. Alan Bishop is a wizard, and keep your eyes on them for sure.
He's working on setting up a date in April with me. So
good. Well, tell him time for me when you see him.
We will, because some of the stuff I just tasted the weeder and the 4-grain he had, and the 4-grain was really approachable compared to some other stuff. So, him and
make sure you ask him about his Amanda Palmer corn, because he sent some to us a few years ago. Just turned 2 years. That's another one that's going to be really good here pretty soon. But ask him about his Amanda Palmer, because the guy knows corn more than I do.
Well, I'll definitely be doing that, because, like you said, he was another one that seemed to have some really interesting kind of sub levels to where you're doing grain. I know, like this past week, he went out to St. Louis and went underneath the kind of the sub areas of a brewery to where they did prohibition style barrel running. And was trying to get yeast to make a specific whiskey just for St. Louis. And I was like, well, that is, a step extra further than a lot of people are going to go to create kind of something. So he sounded neat too. So it's always good to hear someone of prominence talk about someone else interestingly. So everyone else pay attention to that. That'll be sometime in April once we get that scheduled with him. But once again, Robert, thank you so much for coming on. Yes. I mean, we can't appreciate it enough. It's always nice to feel an education when we're talking to someone, but you do it in such a nice, relaxed way. We always appreciate it. It feels like we're just having a chat, like we really are. So we appreciate that. So
thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. So cheers to everyone out there. Have a good rest of the evening.
Cheers.
Let's get into it. 1, 2, 3.